PR News in the Twin Cities, I'm Todd Milby. Amid public backlash, the Bemidji School Board stalled on efforts to close an elementary school where 70% of students are Native American. Matthew Holding Eagle III reports.
J.W. Smith Elementary School will stay open for at least a year. The school board was looking to close it as a cost-saving measure. It cited declining enrollment and the high costs for upkeep on the aging building. Lori Harper is the Director of Education for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. She also has grandchildren who attend the school.
I hope that the school administration has learned from this process and that they work to further build relationships, not just with the 3 tribal nations that border Bemidji School District, but also within their own community.
The Bemidji School Board chair says they're going to look at other potential spending cuts. And in a year, they may revisit the idea of closing the school. I'm Matthew Holding Eagle III.
Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty announced today that her office filed charges against 2 men working as bounty hunters who allegedly pointed replica firearms at 2 people. The incident occurred on March 3rd outside City Hall in Minneapolis. Witnesses told NPR News that they saw people blowing whistles at the men as if they were ICE agents. That's when they say a man pointed what appeared to be a handgun at them. The other man reportedly fired pepper balls at the bystanders with whistles. Moriarty said the men are charged with felony threats of violence and displaying a replica of a firearm. The county attorney called on lawmakers to pass licensing, bonding, and training requirements for bounty hunters in Minnesota. 3 baby eagles have hatched in the nest featured on the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources EagleCam livestream. DNR staff confirmed all 3 eaglets yesterday. They estimate that they're about 4 days old. Bald eagle chicks are born about the size of a tennis ball and weigh about 3 ounces. Typically, eaglets reach about 2/3 of their adult size by early May and fly away from the nest around the end of June. This is NPR News.
Support comes from InVision Distinctive Eyewear, Robert Mark and Lunor Trunk Show, featuring spring and summer collections, April 10th and 11th. Locations and hours at invision-optical.com.
Good evening. I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. Jeffrey Epstein's name didn't enter the national consciousness until about 2019, when he was arrested and charged with sex trafficking of minors, even though he was first convicted in 2008 for solicitation of prostitution with a minor. In 2019, Epstein died by suicide while in federal custody, and the case lost its main perpetrator. It could have faded from public view, but with the release of millions of documents in the last few years, many containing the names of powerful people, mostly men, it's extended the story well beyond Epstein himself. The files implicate institutions, reveal how power networks operate, and have prompted arrests and resignations around the world. Some argue Epstein was not an aberration, but a byproduct of a system that protects privilege, an idea that's resonated far beyond this case. And with the questions raised by the case as they continue to reverberate across the internet, at dinner tables, and in Washington, D.C., it raises the question of why so many public figures were drawn to Epstein. How did he manage to evade accountability for so long? And why were so many powerful and accomplished people so deferential to him? We want you to join our conversation. What do you think the Epstein case says about wealth and power in this country? How surprised were you that so many well-known people from all walks of life were caught up in the Epstein scandal? And we also want to know if you think the survivors have been treated fairly. What about those included in the Epstein files? Who do you think has been held accountable and who should be held accountable? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. And if you're watching our live stream on Facebook or YouTube, you can leave your questions or comments in the chat and we'll answer them. Now I want to bring in my guest. Molly Jong-Fast is the author and contributing writer at the New York Times, where she's been writing about the Epstein case. She's a political analyst at MSNBC News and host of the podcast Fast Politics with Molly Jong-Fast. Her New York Times bestselling memoir is titled How to Lose Your Mother, and she joins us from New York City. Molly, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Molly, I want to start.
Oh,
I'm so glad. We are delighted to have you.
Yeah.
I want to start by talking.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, that's okay. I do want to start by talking about your upbringing in New York City. You would describe it as privileged. You are the daughter of the author and feminist Erica Jong. She's best known for her novel, Fear of Flying, which I'm sure many of our people in our audience have read or heard of. And I ask about this because it does feel relevant to how you've been thinking and writing about the Epstein case. So can you just start there?
Yeah, I mean, I write about politics, and I write for the Times about privilege and the intersection of wealth and politics. And so and also culture. So though this story involves all of the, it's a Venn diagram of culture, wealth, and privilege, and politics, right? Because all of those elements are in the story. The reason why I feel it's so important is because if we use this moment as a moment to look at the way the FBI treats survivors, it could create a sea change. And so, in my mind, this is not just a crime. And it is probably the largest sex trafficking crime in American history, right? More than 1,200 survivors. That's from Todd Blanche. Okay, so that's not some hyperbolic figure. And that went on for decades and decades and decades. So in my mind, as a journalist, it's not just the story of wealthy people abusing children, which it very much is, but it's also the story of a culture that protects them, of an FBI that refuses to look at these children as more important, at these crimes as more important than the people who commit them, and who are at every point making we have basically, and this went on during both Republican and Democratic administrations, which is why I feel like what's needed is a systematic change. Because at every point, we had an FBI that was making a calculus that it was easier to ignore victims than prosecute powerful men.
So let's talk about some of those powerful men whose names have cropped up in the Epstein files, and some women too. I mean, I want to talk about that as well. When you read those emails, when you've been sifting through some of these documents and you see the names that were attached to him, does any of that surprise you, or do you feel like, like you'd be shocked to see people whose names aren't in the Epstein files at this point?
I mean, I think the worst thing about the Epstein files in my mind is that so much of it we had already known and nothing had happened. Like, I remember years and years ago looking at the sex offender map of Manhattan and thinking, oh, yes, in Central Park, that's that very rich guy who abused the girls and got off basically scot-free. I mean, who got off with like a suspended sentence in Palm Beach. And then was free for like a decade to do more abuse. And so maybe a little more than a decade. So that is why I feel this case is so, there's no one in there that you're shocked to see in there, really. And there are a lot of people in there who you knew were already in there. Bill Richardson, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, people that are not, that it is no surprise to see them in there. And Les Wexner. These are people who we all knew. There are some people where it's just there's some collateral overlap, but we knew a lot of these players going into it for years. I mean, that's the thing that's so upsetting to me about this crime is just. We knew crimes, we knew they happened, we knew they were happening, we knew that sort of tangentially at least who was involved in them, and nothing ever happened.
Well, and this is what's been so surprising, I think, to me too, Molly, is like people knew that he had been convicted of a crime, and yet they continued to run in circles with him. What does that say to you about power and influence and connection? You would think that a lot of these well-known names would want to distance themselves from him as early as 2008, right?
So I would say there are two things here. One is, and there's really, like, the New York Times has done such good reporting on this. So Julie K. Brown was the person
with the
who
Miami
took this
Herald
story from a cold case to a real story. And, if you want to talk about the power of journalism and the reason that billionaires are so opposed to journalists, you just look at Julie K. Brown, because that story was dead. That guy was going to get away with it. And then she came back, she found these women, she told the story, and she brought it back. So she should have credit for that. But the Times did really good reporting on how Epstein made all this money and did this sort of con. And part of it was that he was a con man. And part of it was that he was very good at convincing these people he had something they wanted. This is, that is very much an indictment of them, right? To believe that they could, that what he had was so worth it that they should compromise their morals and values to get it.
And that's a good point, Molly, right? Epstein wasn't, college educated. He lied about his college education early in his career, and yet he was somehow able to be an interloper in these circles of power. I mean, as someone who has lived in New York and has been, an observer of those circles, I mean, how do you think he was able to wedge his way in and charm and woo so many people?
I mean, I think I think he was a very successful, manipulator. I think he was a con man. But I also think that, New York society is really ruled by wealth, and he sort of traded wealth for celebrity, for power, and he sort of made different connections, and he was a connector. And I don't think it's so, it's one of the functions of living in a city that's so controlled by wealth. If you come in and you seem very wealthy, you can sort of open a lot of doors. And, if you looked at 18th century New York, you might not be able to come in as a new person. But ultimately, I think that you'd still probably rather live in now versus a sort of Edith Wharton-y New York.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's probably worth pointing out is that a lot of people whose names end up or that have cropped up in these email exchanges aren't necessarily doing anything illegal, but there's an exchange, there are perks, there's some sort of tit for tat. Hey, can you get my kid into college? My kid needs a job. Can you help me out? I live in Rochester, Minnesota, and Mayo Clinic's name comes up in sort of a very benign way, but people wanted to know if he knew doctors here. We are justifiably focused on the victims and the sex trafficking crimes here. These aren't illegal exchanges, but they're also important. I mean, what do you think they're important? What do you make of them?
I mean, I think the banal, people helping each other happens everywhere. I mean,
all the time.
You don't have to be a billionaire or a criminal to help people, and to sort of want to do things for other people's kids. That I don't think is so unreasonable. The thing that's jarring is that it happened. It happens with sex trafficking. It's one thing to want to help somebody's kid get a job, but it's another thing to and again, I think the biggest problem with this case, besides the moral horror of what it is that we're not getting all of the documents. We're probably not getting the lion's share of the documents. The way they're being released is in the hopes of obfuscating.
It's
Clearly.
Confusing. It's really confusing.
And it's intentionally confusing, right? Because there was a way to release this with it. You could have had guidance written. You could have had a special prosecutor. There was a special master to read through what needs to be released, what doesn't. I mean, the federal government knows how to release documents in a way that makes them make sense. They chose not to do that here. And they chose not to do that here very intentionally, because they did not want, this was information that they released under duress because of a discharge petition that made it through the House. And that, Mike Johnson is not so skilled that he was able to kill this discharge petition. And so you had this law that was passed that mandated they release the Epstein files, but they did it, they took as much time as possible. And when they did, they set it up in a way to make it as hard as possible to glean information from the files.
I want to go to Joey now in River Falls, Wisconsin. Joey, what do you want to share with us tonight?
Well, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to engage on this subject of the protecting the overdogs and overprivileged class. And what we have here, is the story of this Tyrant T, the twice impeached treasonous truthophobe from the Twitter sphere Twilight Zone, are committing on this crime spree. And I'm near Minneapolis. I mean, what on earth? When you have secret police from the government, with this, I mean, it's just the atrocity of these crimes that are being committed routinely. And the key thing that I'm wondering, what is it with this feckless political party, the Democrats? You have one member of Congress who's calling for the remedy for the impeachment and conviction and removal of, just one example of someone who's disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. How did all of this slip by?
Joey, I think what I hear you saying is you're frustrated that the Democrats haven't been more aggressive in calling the president to task on this and having him explain his role.
Him. He should have never been there. He's disqualified from holding office as an insurrectionist.
Thank you.
It's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, Joey, I want to give Molly a chance. I can sense you're frustrated. I want to give Molly a chance to talk about this a little bit. Okay, so Molly, we know that the former president, Bill Clinton, has been testifying. I mean, Hillary Clinton was testifying. I mean, do you think that there's any universe in which President Donald Trump would be called to testify on this?
So, and I understand the caller's frustration, by the way, and I think that there's quite a lot of, when you talk to people, when you talk to normal voters, what we hear a lot is rage at Donald Trump, but a lot of frustration towards elected Democrats. And I think that there's going to be a real moment of reckoning for the party leadership, which I think will be really interesting. Because I think people feel their electeds are not doing enough for them, which is a completely legitimate complaint. So here's what I think. House Oversight, which has been running a lot of these hearings, is a really interesting committee. And it's headed by a guy called Robert Garcia, who is, I think, very smart and really good at what he does. He's the ranking. He's the Democrat. The Republican on that committee is he's just sort of a fascinating character. And what he's done is he pushed to have Bill and Hillary both testify. And I think that what that did was it opened the door to a new precedent. So, that Donald Trump would be forced to test. I mean, first of all, I think Donald Trump probably will not show up if he's subpoenaed, and
Yeah.
I think you wouldn't be able to do that until he was out of office, and by that time, he'll be 83, and I'm not sure we're going to see a kind of throwdown that way, or he'll be 82. I'm not sure we'll see a kind of throwdown like that, but it has now set a precedent for members of the administration, previous administrations testifying. And I do think ultimately that is problematic for Republicans any which way. So, going to get much information out of Hillary Clinton because she really didn't know him. Like, Bill Clinton, I fully, make him testify. Absolutely. He is in the files. He's in the photos for sure. Hillary, absolutely, that was just a fishing expedition. And it clearly was. And it just opened the door to a lot of hurt for Republicans later on.
Just to make a point there, Walter on Facebook writes, the Jeffrey Epstein case has become a symbol of elite liberal impunity, that the rules don't apply to the liberal wealthy and connected. Just to tee off there a little bit. If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking tonight with author and New York Times contributing writer Molly Jong-Fast. We're talking about the Epstein files tonight, which she's been doing a lot of reporting and writing on, and we want you to join our conversation. What do you think the Epstein case says about wealth and power in this country? Do you think the survivors have been treated fairly? And do you think those implicated in the files have been held accountable? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Or if you're watching on our live stream on Facebook or YouTube, you can leave your questions or comments in the chat and we will answer them on the air. Now, Molly, I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about how the federal government has released these documents. You've written about how they've really this has not been good for the victims either, right? They're releasing documents under duress. A lot of names have been released. Can you say more about how this could have been done well and what you think the impact is there?
Yeah, I actually talked to Danny Belsky, who's a survivor, who's just a really great speaker, really good at explaining what her life is like and what she's been through. And they published her address. They published photos of some of these women. They just did not care about, they redacted Trump's name. There was reporting, they went through, redacted Trump's name. And then everybody else was sort of out of luck, some people got redacted. A lot of the redactions felt like they were protecting either members of the FBI, or, people in the government or powerful men. And that, it just was what should have happened. And what the Oversight Committee asked for was to appoint a special master to look through all the files. The thing that I think is the worst part of this whole story is that there's just a lot still missing. And
say more about that. What are you looking for? What do you want to see?
I want to know, there were thousands of hours of tape, right? He had cameras. He had cameras in every room. Virginia Giuffre describes being in a bathroom and realizing that he's got a camera there. He's got a camera here. She goes into a back room and there's guys watching videos. So there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of hours of video from all different houses. So I want to know where all that video went. I want to know who watched the video. I want to know what they saw. I want, you talk to the survivors and they're like, my 302s are missing. 302s are the interviews that the FBI does. So there clearly some of those are missing. Probably a lot of those are missing. And then there's just like things, for example, with New Mexico, with the Zorro Ranch. They were, New Mexican authorities were supposed to search Zorro Ranch. And then they were told by the federal government, no, we have this thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I need to know. I want to see the paper trail of who said that to who. Where did that come from? Who in the federal government decided that this was no longer New Mexico's jurisdiction? And how did that happen? And even like some of the redactions, there's this woman prosecutor who keeps pushing to get them to do more, and they keep shutting her down. And so I want to know where all of this is coming from, where these, and I mean, Alex Acosta is the interview I want to see. Like,
Yeah.
I want to
For
know.
our audience who's not following that
Yeah, let me
thread
explain.
closely, can you say
Alex
more?
Acosta, was in the Trump administration, in the first Trump administration. He was the architect of this unprecedented sweetheart deal that Epstein got in Palm Beach, Florida. And he was really involved in those stories. So I wanted to know how this deal came to pass, what Alex Acosta did. That is testimony I would like to see in front of Congress. And I want to see sworn testimony in front of Congress. Like, Hillary Clinton, that's a partisan witch hunt. It is. She has no connection to Epstein. Bill Clinton, that's not necessarily a partisan witch hunt. Alex Acosta, that's just information we need to have.
Yeah. Okay. Another comment on YouTube's coming in from John. He writes, they were quick to cancel Cesar Chavez. That is the co-founder of the Farm Labor Union. I hope I'm getting that right. But they will never hold Bill Clinton accountable. This is a very interesting contrast, I think, here, right? Cesar Chavez represented working class, minorities. Bill Clinton is very much part of these upper echelon elite circles. What do you make of that comment?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can make this a partisan food fight. Bill Clinton's in there, but so is Donald Trump. I mean,
right.
And I would hope that instead of doing that, and look, Bill Clinton, I mean, I want them all to get justice. I want these women to get justice. But I also think, if we don't look at the way the FBI dealt with this, then we are just begging for this to happen again. Like, there are real systematic changes that you could do to American law enforcement to make it so that government agencies like the FBI take women who are victims more seriously. And that should be the first thing that any of us talk about. So will they get Bill Clinton? I mean, I have no idea. Will they get any? But, the question is, like, it's not just because Bill Clinton's a Democrat, because there are many men in those files who have had to, and again, we don't know what any of these people have done, right? Because there just hasn't been the kind of investigation that there needs to be, the kind of reporting that there needs to be, the kind of, prosecution for some of these people that there needs to be. But it should not be partisan. There are a lot of people in these files that are both on the left and the right.
Right. If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking tonight with author and New York Times contributing writer Molly Jong-Fast. We're talking about the Epstein files, and we want to hear from you. What do you think the Epstein case says about wealth and power in America? We want to know what you think. How you think the survivors have been treated, if they've been treated fairly, or what you'd like to see change for them. And do you think those implicated in the files have been held accountable? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. I know some folks are watching our live stream, and you can leave your comments or questions in the chat on Facebook and YouTube, and Molly will respond to them on the air. Molly, going back to what you just said about systematic changes for victims, what do you, when you're talking to victims, what are you hearing from them that they would like to see change? What are you hearing from victims' rights advocates that they think needs to be changed as a result of all of this coming out into the light?
Well, I'm going to tell you what the worst thing that I've seen has been, which I think is really, I was shocked by. These women, and I've only talked to two of them, so I haven't, there are journalists who have talked to everybody. I haven't done, I came very late to this story in some ways. And, there are some women who have really talked to the women, and there are a lot of women.
Yeah.
Or maybe I've talked to maybe three of them. But anyway, but what I think is really important is that all these women describe being bullied on the internet, like really
Yeah.
bullied on the internet. And there's this woman I'm not even going to mention her name, on Instagram, who's like famous for bullying these victims, who believes that it was all psyop. There's quite a lot of really bad online bullying. And if you think about these women, like Virginia, who died, maybe
Yeah.
killed herself, uh, these women have really been through just some of the worst, most
Yeah.
unimaginable,
Sexual
kind
abuse
of,
and
and
being,
emotion.
just vilified
Yeah.
for it in the public. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and emotional abuse, and they were children, and there's Ghislaine did a lot of psychological abuse, so that these women wouldn't leave. Or, I mean, it depends. There were definitely different people had different levels of bad experiences, but some of these
Yeah.
women really have had some of the deepest psychological kind of tortury stuff as children, and then to have them be bullied on the internet. I don't know why that got me so upset, this idea that these women, who are really victims, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
survivors, but they're victims, and are being just targeted on the internet, just
And
made me upset.
yeah, and I mean, you've written about this, right? It's like these victims say that they're really just seeking justice, and they're repeatedly
Yeah.
suffering in their pursuit because of feeling like they're like an afterthought in this conversation, because the scandal is so quite scandalous, right?
Well,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, I also,
why does that keep happening? Go ahead.
well, I mean, part of it is that part of it is that they are not. Nobody is thinking about the victims. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, there are very few, right? The oversight committee is largely thinking along partisan lines on the left and the right. I mean, I like to think that Congressman Garcia is focused on trying to get them some justice, but ultimately, it's still, I mean, it is there's not a huge focus. They have no, it just seems very unlikely that a lot of the men involved in this are going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Very
And,
unlikely.
and
You know, yeah, go on.
I was just going to ask too, because I know you've talked to Maria Farmer, for instance, one of the victims, and one thing that she told you, and I'd love for you to hear more from you on this, is that she felt like she could speak up because she came from more of a middle class family. She had more of an education than some of the other victims.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
That's
something
like relates to education. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. That's something I'm very interested in. So Maria Farmer was the first person to come forward in the 90s. So
Mm-hmm.
if you had if the FBI had at that moment taken her seriously, imagine how many women could 20 years worth of victims could have been spared, which, if you think about it, is such an indictment on the way
Mm-hmm.
that this FBI treated her. So she called the FBI. She told me the story recently. She called the FBI, and then she called. They told her to call the office, her local police station. She did that. She did file a complaint, and everybody just ignored her. She, in fact, when the files were released, she felt so vindicated because her
Because
original complaint
her
was in
name was
there,
in
and
there.
right, and people had said she didn't really do it, and there had been just so much. Uh, so what I think is that she came from this very educated background where her parents were both really educated. And so when this happened to her, she couldn't a lot of these women children, they're really, a lot of them are like 13, 14, 15, children were picked because they were they were sort of unable to advocate for themselves because they were so young, or some of them had come from these very broken families, which, families where there was no one home, or there was a parent who was an addict. And so they couldn't use the levers available to them because they weren't available.
Yeah.
So you had someone like Maria who had these educated parents and they were around, and she was a little bit older too. And so she was sort of, she had this sort of structure to be able to do it. Because remember, there are like all these girls decades worth of girls who just sort of disappear. And then once he gets out of jail for the first time, he starts going after Eastern European girls because because when they don't
it's more
have
anonymous
citizenship, he's able to sort of get rid of them. And it's a little less, I think you could see the math in his head that like it's a little less likely to get him in trouble than the like white 14-year-old girls. But the point is, these young girls in Florida just didn't have the levers that they would need to be able to report this. And again, that is where this is so much about wealth and power. Because if you think about it, and this is like, if you look at sexual harassment writ large, right? It happens to people who don't have the language to be able to lodge the complaint, or they don't have the structure to be able to have people who are have their backs, or it is so very much, if you're a young girl who doesn't have parents and who has a parent who's an addict who's barely surviving, you don't
why
have
would
the
anyone
wherewithal.
listen to you? Yeah.
Right. And you don't, and why would you even do it? Because you barely are surviving. And I think ultimately that is why this is such it's just these women had so little to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking tonight with author and New York Times contributing writer Molly Jong-Fast about the Epstein files. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think the Epstein case says about wealth and power in this country, and whether you think those implicated in the files have been held accountable. Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Gary in St. Cloud has been waiting patiently. Gary, what do you want to share with us tonight?
I'd like to share the fact of personally, this is a call to change the administration. The House and the Senate, they're in total control, and they don't have the gumption to stand up to some of these individuals. They're the ones that are hiding all of this information. And again, my call is we have to change this administration in November and control the legislative branch that is the investigative branch, and get on top of this and change all of these, just to, get a change in the legislative branch so this can be done properly.
Well, Gary, I'm so interested in what you're saying, and I want to ask you a follow-up. Do you see this as a partisan issue? Are you someone who has typically voted one way or another? Has this changed how you view the party that you've traditionally supported?
Straight and forward, I've been Democrat all my life, but whether they're right or left, Democrat, Republican, these people have to be brought to justice, and get an investigative branch in there that will do this. Everything I try and keep on top of this is covered up by the administration that we're in now, the FBI, et cetera, the current Attorney General's office. And it's so evident if you listen to the news and follow some of this stuff. my view is these victims out there need to, I guess I don't have the right verbiage or whatever, but they need to have this justice for themselves. Whether they're Democrat or Republican, let's go after these people.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gary. You know, Molly, I have found the swirl around the Epstein files to be interesting politically. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Trump's most loyal supporters, breaking with him over the release of these files. Do you think this has shifted the calculus going into a midterm election that is clearly very important to the Trump administration? And, you know, it's going to be one to watch, right?
I mean, so I would say this. I think that two things have really peeled off a lot of MAGA voters. And it was, I mean, this is such a like dumb self-inflicted injury on Trump's part for himself. But there are two things that have really peeled off MAGA voters. One is this, because remember, Donald Trump in the beginning, in his first administration, he had this whole thing where he said there was QAnon, and that Hillary Clinton was running a sex shop, remember, sex trafficking out of the basement of a pizza parlor?
Yeah, in Washington, where I used to live. Yep.
Right. And a million different ways Donald Trump played into that quietly. You know, he would retweet trust the plan, or, you know, he would retweet things that, you know, implied that there was a sex trafficking ring that he was going to bring down. Okay, there was no sex trafficking ring. Comet Pizza did not have a basement. There was, you know, that wasn't real. But,
and people got shot, right, as a result of someone believing that conspiracy. Yeah.
Well, somebody went into showed up there with a gun. But here we have a real, not a conspiracy, really sex trafficking of children, and Trump doesn't want to release it. And so the question is, you either need to be against, I mean, I personally think you should be against sex trafficking, period, paragraph. But Donald Trump really advertised himself as that. And then when given the opportunity to release the Epstein files, to have real transparency, he refused it.
And do you feel like there are fractures in the MAGA base because of his reluctance to release the files, or this growing perception that he might be quite implicated if they released all of the documents?
I think it's both, right? I mean, there's just not enough information. I think certainly for me, there's not enough information to go on because we just don't have enough information. I mean,
we don't have enough information.
I feel like we're getting a very small fraction of all the stuff the DOJ has. And I do not believe that's half the files. I don't believe I think there's a lot that we're not seeing. So I think the question is, does I don't know what they blame him for, but certainly I think that there's a feeling that is one of the things that is driving a wedge in MAGA. But I think the big thing is going to be the war. In my mind, though, what is, you know, these women, I continue to feel that so much of this happened that didn't need to happen. Like, had the FBI been better at stopping this, like, you could have prevented the lives of so many women getting really children getting ruined.
I want to go now to Cynthia and Sartell. Cynthia, what do you want to share with us?
I just want to share that I'm not surprised that the perpetrators in the Epstein files are not more vigorously prosecuted. If you look at sexual assault in this country, I think the statistic is 3 out of 4 women have been sexually assaulted in their life. You look at the prosecution and punishment for the perpetrators, there's absolutely nothing. Priests hid behind the diocese. People, the men, it's just not prosecuted. So why would it, just because wealth is involved, maybe we have a lens on it. But this is throughout the country. Sexual assault does not get prosecuted.
Cynthia, thank you for calling. And Cynthia makes a really good comparison to sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, which, of course, also went on for decades and was similarly covered up. I mean, what do you make of Cynthia's comment there, Molly?
I think she's right. And I think the thing that I have so wanted for this is not that it, I mean, look, there's certainly a lot of partisan issues here, but the question of how we treat the youngest of us, the children, and how we protect them as a society, one of the richest societies in the world, a country that has so much science and so much wealth and so much privilege, and we can't protect our children. And I feel like the worst part of it is that there's some part of us that doesn't want to protect these children, right? Because it should be easy to look at the FBI and be like, okay, we need to change the way we treat victims of sexual assault. That should be easy. We should be, there shouldn't be a barrier to this. And instead, what we see is that, the Epstein files are sort of treated like a Rorschach. People come into it for a partisan thing. Some people are bullying the victims online. Like, it's all sort of the worst outcomes. And what I would like for these women is, that they get some of his money because they, it should be theirs, honestly, and that they get some accountability, that there's some investigations into these men, that these civil trials go on, and that the FBI really does take this as a moment to change the way they investigate these cases.
Is that what justice would look like for you?
Yeah, but I don't want to sensationalize this, because I think that what this caller said is really important, that it's just this system is set up to really take advantage of these people, and they're not going to necessarily get the kind of justice, the Hollywood justice that a lot of us would like them to see them get. But I do think the more we talk about this, the more we talk about how society treats survivors and how we look at crimes and how this kind of stuff goes, that we get more, we have more information, that we sort of look at the way we do this in a different way. I think that can only be for the good. And certainly I do not see that happening, which is disappointing.
Well, speaking of, you said Hollywood justice, there was just something I saw yesterday about a series where Laura Dern is going to star in it. I don't mean to, make this conversation about entertainment, but like you just said, we're talking about it more. I mean, do you think that kind of treatment is helpful here?
I mean, I think anything you can do is helpful, right? I mean, that's, for sure, being able to talk about how we as a society deal with this, all really important. But it's just disappointing. You know what? It's disappointing to not see more for them. And that really does, I just would like to see these women get more.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left here, and I want to go back to something we didn't get a chance to talk about earlier, Molly, and that we talked a lot about politicians being implicated in the files. I mean, being, clearly involved in the sex trafficking that was going on. One of the more high-profile arrests that have been made recently happened in England with Andrew Mountbatten. How have other countries treated this problem, particularly England? What do you think, officials here should learn from them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So England and also Norway, there are a bunch of Scandinavian countries where they've taken it much more seriously. Yes. I do actually think that's been really heartening to see countries like that. And it does go back to this feeling, at least that I've had, and I don't know if other people have had this, where it does feel like we have uniquely as a country lost our minds in the way that Europe has not. right? Like we have elected this guy who had all these trials going, and sort of said, was a sort of rejection of the kind of Me Too, the kind of come to Jesus moment we had as a culture about sexual assault, sexual violence, and just misogyny more generally. So I do think that watching other countries deal with it in a less insane way has been weirdly heartening.
And I think, you got to wonder, too. I mean, Andrew Mountbatten had already sort of been discharged from the family to some degree. I mean, his profile was high. There was a lot of public pressure there. And obviously there's been public pressure here. But do you think that there was nothing they had to take that final step and do something very publicly with him in England?
Yeah, I mean, but I think we do too. I mean, there's clearly like the sort of Trump has created a sort of accountability vacuum because he pardons people who have committed crimes, who aren't, they're not necessarily good actors. They're not people who have served their debt. They're just people who he doesn't feel, he feels they deserve, for one way or another, deserve a pardon. So, I do think I would like to see, I think all of that stuff is on hold right now, which is sort of insane.
Going back to the bigger picture of how this has all been released, most of us are not following this closely. We don't have time to do that. And it really just feels so removed from everyday life. I mean, stepping back, how do you think wealth really engenders the kind of rules don't apply to me sort of mentality that might not feel familiar at all to, maybe even some of the people who are calling in from rural Minnesota tonight?
Yeah, look, I think this culture that Trump is very much a part of like you can have whatever you want. And I think that a lot of us don't relate to it because it's so appalling and also because it's just not what a lot of us have in our lives. Look, I think there's a lot to say about wealthy people who do bad stuff, but and I think the fact that these people got away with it for so long is likely because of their wealth. But I also think that a lot of people get away with a lot of bad stuff, and that if we had a government that were a little more focused on really trusting survivors and listening to women and trying to not, one of the experiences that Maria Farmer talks about is just how much she's she kept trying to report this and they kept sort of brushing her off. And and she kept really trying and trying and trying. So I think that in my mind is the original sin here. So like, yes, it's an interesting story because it has wealth, it has culture, it has politicians, it has, everything. But in the end, the world that doesn't take Maria Farmer seriously is that same world that doesn't take, all these other victims seriously. And so you don't get to a place where you have these kind of sex trafficking rings unless you have real failures, systematic failures at every level.
Yeah. Well, our time is up for tonight. I want to thank our guest, Molly Jong-Fast, as an author, contributing writer at the New York Times, a political analyst at MSNBC, and the host of the podcast Fast Politics with Molly Jong-Fast. Her New York Times bestselling memoir is titled How to Lose Your Mother. This conversation was produced by Gabrielle Zuckerman. Thanks so much for tuning in. Join us tomorrow night at 8.
Support comes from the Minnesota Zoo Foundation. This Zoo Lovers Giving Day, gifts can help the zoo connect people, animals, and the natural world to help save wildlife. More at mnzoofoundation.org/zoolovers. Programming is supported by Concordia College in Moorhead, where students develop career readiness skills through authentic research experiences with faculty scholars dedicated to student success. Applications for enrollment now being accepted. More information at concordiacollege.edu.